I have a confession to make. I have been with a lot of pretenders in my lifetime. Really, a lot of pretenders. There's one guy who stands out in particular for me right now. He hadn't had sex for a long time, and by that I'm talking a couple of years, maybe more than a couple. He was married, and he and his wife had an agreement that he was allowed to seek sexual fulfillment outside of the relationship. She had had some health issues, and that prevented her from physically being able to be sexual, but they loved each other. The marriage was solid. They went to therapy and came up with a plan. And although he had been allowed to have sex outside of the marriage for several years, he hadn't. He had not been successful in finding someone. And at the time, I was, how can I say this? I was sexually full. My cup was running over. I had a couple of lovers and I was feeling really good, satisfied emotionally, physically. It was great. So I thought I should probably donate sex to him. He and I were friends. We hung out. We would eat pancakes together. And I thought, well, I've got more than enough so I can share. Sounds strange, but it was kind of like community service, I guess. It was like, oh, I care about this person and I know this is something that I could do for him. Anyway, we made a plan to have an experience, and we had talked about, the fact that he hadn't had sex in a while. So I had no expectations around anything. I definitely didn't even think it might be great because, when you haven't done it for a while, it is like riding a bike. You know what to do, but there's like nervousness and excitement, maybe a little anxiety. So I thought this is just for his pleasure. I wasn't really thinking about my own pleasure in this regard. Once we finally, got to the part where we were getting ready to do the deed, there was like not very much foreplay. There was, like I said, the awkwardness and all that. And it was over fast. I'm talking like less than 2 minutes. I actually might be exaggerating. It probably was faster than that. But again, to be expected when you haven't done it for a few years. And, there's the adrenaline and the anxiousness and the excitement, all that was happening. So I was not bothered by how it went. In fact, for me, it was like, well, if he wants to go again, we can do that. There's also other things we can do because sometimes you can go multiple rounds. It doesn't have to include an erection or anything. I was like game for whatever went down. The problem was after he finished, he pretended like he hadn't finished, even though there were so many physical indications that he had ejaculated, but he just continued to perform awkwardly, I might add. But I was aware, of what was going on, and that kind of ruined the experience a little bit. It could have just been that he finished quickly. We could have, talked, maybe cuddled. We could have played in other ways. Like it could have gone a lot of different ways, but it didn't. So that kind of ruined it. And then he felt away and then he kind of left as fast as he came. No pun intended. You might be asking what this has to do with erectile dysfunction because that's what this episode is about. But the reason I'm sharing that story is because, as we mentioned in the first episode in the series, a lot of men with ED function like that too. So now I want to share a contrasting experience with you. I had started seeing someone who told me up front that he was experiencing erectile dysfunction. He didn't wait for it to happen and then try to explain. He just told me before we didn't even know we would go there, but he was upfront about that. It wasn't like he didn't give a speech. It was just kind of like, I want you to know that I'm dealing with some ED and, sometimes I use some medication. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just want you to know. And I really appreciated that. Because I knew what I was getting into. And it wasn't my first rodeo. So, I had had experiences with ED before. So that wasn't a big deal. But I loved that there was no surprise, no confusion, no ambiguity. We just knew what was what. And the sex was great from the start. And it wasn't great because he had an erection. Again, sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. It was great because of how we were able to talk. Because we communicated and he was honest, it was no big deal. He didn't have to perform. There was no pretension. I didn't have any unrealistic expectations. We just both knew what was what. And that honesty created intimacy from the beginning. It also, built a level of trust. And more importantly, it took the pressure off both of us. So we're not talking ED versus PE here. Both of them can be points of shame. Both of them can conjure avoidance. Both of them can create silence. But what made the difference was the communication, being able to talk. I read a statistic that said less than 60% of men experiencing erectile dysfunction actually talk about it with their partners. That means that more than half of the men dealing with this are keeping it to themselves. That breaks my heart a little bit, because the silence isn't just embarrassment, it's protection. Protecting perception, not wanting to appear weak or unmanly. Protection from disappointment, their own and their partners. Maybe they might even be protecting, the relationship because they're afraid that this could be a deal breaker. A lot could be going on, but being silent creates distance no matter what. Because while you're not talking, your partner is making up their own story about what's going on. And usually the story is wrong, but that's what the brain does, always trying to solve for X. The brain does not know what to do when there's not enough information, and it will fill in the blank with a story, mostly untrue, almost every time. So this is part 3 in our 6-part series on ED. Last week, we talked about the mechanics, what's going on physiologically. This week, we're talking about the conversation, how to bring it up, what to say, when to say it, and how not to let ED become an identity. But before I dive into it, I do want you to know that the guy that I mentioned at the beginning, we didn't have sex again. It wasn't because he pretended, it was just because we didn't talk. Talking about hard and uncomfortable things is an opportunity to create intimacy. But not talking is the opposite. And so we just never went there again. Our friendship kind of fizzled out. It was a little bit sad, actually, because I enjoyed him outside of that. And part of me regretted having donated the sex in the first place because maybe we would have remained friends. But, woulda, shoulda, coulda. Now, the other guy who talked about the ED up front, he and I continued to have a sexual relationship for a long time. Not because of the ED, but because we could be honest about it. So the difference between those two experiences, again, was communication. Communication can make all the difference. Okay, so now let's really get into it. So where and when do you have a conversation about ED? Well, first I want to say that the timing matters. Timing really matters. The worst time, in my opinion, to talk about it is right after it happens. While you're still in bed, you just tried to have sex, the erection didn't work out, and now one or both of you is frustrated and maybe there's some embarrassment. And while this could be an opportunity to have a heart-to-heart because you're both naked physically and possibly emotionally, and you don't have pockets, so it's hard to hide. So that might seem like a real ideal setting. And mostly we think that because we've seen it in movies, but I do not recommend it. Conversations like these are better had in neutral territory. Outside of the bedroom, when you're not naked and vulnerable and raw about what just happened. You got pockets and clothes, and sometimes those things can be inhibitive. But when you're talking about something uncomfortable, sometimes you need creature comforts, right? So maybe you talk about it during a walk or over coffee. You could talk about it on the couch on Sunday morning when you're both calm and not rushing to get anywhere. Just pick a time when you can both be present, not distracted, not exhausted, not before or right after sex. And don't wait until you're in the middle of a fight. Please don't do that. I implore you to not have this conversation when you are agitated about anything in any way. You just do not want to bring it up when emotions are high. And this is also if you are the partner of someone experiencing ED. Do not do that, because when you are emotionally charged and you talk about something tender, it becomes ammunition, and you do not want that. When you are having a conversation about something like this is about conveying information and expression, naming what's going on, and being able to be present for that. So I think it is crucial to be aware of timing, because you want to be able to mitigate or prevent defensiveness on both sides. So now let's get into what you say. First rule, keep it simple. You don't want to say like, I think I might be having some issues. Direct is always better. I've been experiencing some erectile challenges. Let's talk. Can we talk about it? Direct is always better. But ED, again, is not an identity. It's an experience you're having. That's why I said, I've been experiencing some erectile dysfunction. I've been experiencing some challenges maintaining an erection. Experiencing, not I have. It's not an identity. So when you say I'm experiencing instead of I have, you are naming what's happening without letting it define you. And if you feel comfortable and safe and the vibe is open, you can go deeper and you can name how it's making you feel. I'm having some heavy feelings about this. This makes me question my manhood. It's making me feel some kind of way. You don't have to have perfect language, but if you feel safe and comfortable enough to be vulnerable with your partner, naming the feelings can create deeper intimacy. It is optional. It's completely up to you. And it's completely up to you to trust the feelings of the moment, the relationship, and the other person. It is also completely okay if you just want to state what's happening. I'm experiencing some ED. Can we talk? Please don't apologize excessively. If you have to, because sometimes saying sorry is a compulsion, try to keep it to one. I'm sorry this is happening. You don't need to grovel or make promises about fixing it. If your partner asks questions, answer honestly. If you don't know the answer, just say that. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's permanent. I'm not sure what will help. I haven't discussed this with a doctor. You're not expected to have all the answers, but just be honest about what you do know. Don't make up things. And don't regurgitate what you've seen on the Google. Although sometimes those things can be helpful, but also they can sometimes give us way too much to chew on, and we start creating stories around that. Anyway, now I want to pivot a little bit. When you have a conversation around erectile dysfunction, you get to now redefine what sex actually is. For a lot of us, sex means penetration because that's what we learned. That's what we've been conditioned. For a lot of us, that's a default. Penis and vagina, penis and anus equal sex. But as we age and our bodies start changing and they stop functioning the way that they used to, that definition really doesn't serve us. It never did really, but it really doesn't serve when you get to this age where things are different. So you have to kind of expand what you think sex is. Sex can become about pleasure and touch and intimacy. In the movies, that's what it's about. But a lot of us, again, in real life, sex can be different. But it can be about those things. Sex can be about being present with your own body and with another body. It can be about someone else being present with your body and their body. You've got hands, you've got a mouth, your whole body is capable of giving and receiving pleasure. A hard cock is one tool in the toolbox. When you decentralize erections, you open up a world of possibilities because you get to slow down and pay attention and explore what feels good without the pressure of performing. You might even find that you and your partner actually prefer this. And not because you don't enjoy penetration and not because you never want to do it again, but simply because there's more attentiveness, more creativity, more presence. So talking about it gives you permission to explore different kinds of sex, and maybe one that doesn't hinge on whether or not you can have an erection. This is not an invitation to settle. This is expansion, right? This is expansion. Now I want to switch back a little bit to the actual conversation, because I know that not every conversation goes well, no matter what you're talking about. So I want to give you a little bit to chew on in the event that the conversation goes left. Sometimes partners react badly, because that's how humans are. Sometimes we react badly, especially if there is fear or confusion or feelings of rejection involved. We can react poorly. So your partner might make it about themselves. Are you not attracted to me anymore? Is it something I did? Am I not sexy enough? That can be frustrating for you because this isn't about them, but they don't know yet. That's just their insecurity talking. And sometimes people can be cruel when they feel they need to defend themselves, right? I was on Reddit, which is sometimes a great idea. I was looking to see what kind of conversations are being had around erectile dysfunction, but I read some posts from partners that were mean, calling their partner soft cock, and what am I supposed to do with that? And that shit is hurtful. But usually when people say things like that, it's coming from a place of feeling rejected themselves. And I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just giving some context. So if your partner reacts badly in the moment, you don't have to keep explaining. You can say, I know this is a lot to process. I'm telling you because I want us to deal with this together. I'm not blaming you. And then you can give them space to sit with it. Not every conversation ends with understanding and support right away. We need to normalize that. And if they respond poorly and say unpleasant things, which I hope that doesn't happen, but if it does, that also needs to be a conversation. But sometimes we have to give our partners space to work through their own feelings about things. So here's what you don't do, though. You don't take back what you said. You don't backtrack and pretend it's not a big deal. You told the truth and you just let that sit, and then give them space and give yourself space. Now, if you happen to be a partner listening to this and you're with someone who is currently experiencing ED, I got some tips for you too. Here's what not to do. Try not to make it about you. It's their body that's responding the way that it is and different than it used to. It has nothing to do with how attractive you are. Try not to pity them. Don't say, it's okay, it's fine, don't worry about it. If you say that over and over, it's not helpful. It can feel dismissive. So don't do that. Try not to go into fix mode. You don't have to suggest supplements or workouts or sex toys in the first 5 minutes. Just listen. Don't dismiss what they're saying. Don't say stuff like it happens to everyone or it's not a big deal. That might be well-intentioned, but it can feel minimizing to the person who's going through it. So don't do that. And try not to use blame and shame as a means of getting through this. So saying stuff like, well, if you didn't drink so much, or maybe if you exercise more, even if those things are true, at the beginning when the person is being vulnerable and sharing this hard thing, not the time. What you do instead is you listen. You believe them. You ask, how can you support them? You tell them you want to figure it out together. If that's true for you. It doesn't have to be true for you, but if it's true for you, let them know. Your response doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to try not to make things worse because it's a tender thing. These conversations open up so much. When you can talk about it, you can stop making up stories. Both of you can stop making up stories. Your partner gets to stop thinking that you don't want them. You get to stop thinking that you are broken beyond repair. The mystery is gone. When there's no mystery, you can do something about it. And maybe that's seeing a doctor. Maybe it's trying therapy separately or together. Maybe it's just acknowledging that sex looks different now and figuring out what that means and what that could look like together. The conversation also takes the pressure off. Once you've named the thing, you are no longer performing okayness. Then you get to relax into whatever your body is capable of on any given day. Performance anxiety is one of the biggest contributors to erectile dysfunction. When you're not constantly worried about whether or not you'll get hard, you might actually get hard more often. You just never know about these things. But even if you don't, you've already talked about it. Your partner knows. There's no reason to hide. So that's the conversation. When to have it, what to say, what can go wrong. But the conversation, of course, is just the beginning. Next week, we're going to dig into part 4 of the series, and we're going to be talking about the partner's experience. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the questions that partners Google. We're going there because ED doesn't just happen to one person. It happens to the relationship. It happens to both people. And understanding what's going on for you is great, but also we need to understand what's going on with your partner. And that gives you a more solid footing to work through it together. So if you're in a relationship, you do not want to miss next week's episode. It might be the most important episode for couples. I'll see you back here then. Ciao.